Hey everyone, Davey Blackburn here. Just want to take a moment to personally invite you to our book launch event that we're holding August 1st in Indianapolis, actually right outside of Indianapolis, at this beautiful venue called the Sixpence in Whitestown, Indiana. I'm telling you, this is going to be an unbelievable night. It's going to be so sacred. Actually, it turns out that August 1st, we didn't really necessarily plan for it this way, but August 1st it was my wedding anniversary with Amanda. When we had a double wedding with her sister Amber and our brother-in-law Gavin. And so it's just gonna be a beautiful, beautiful time to celebrate Amanda, her life, her legacy, the message of nothing is wasted. And so many of you guys have asked, why have we not done any in-person events for Nothing is Wasted, like meetups and stuff like that? Well, because we have been reserving it for this particular season of launching the book to bring our Nothing is Wasted family together for the very first time. We thought that would be just such a commemorative time to do that. So you don't want to miss it. You can get tickets online right now. They are filling up fast. So make sure you go get your tickets. Make an entire weekend out of it. It's a Thursday night. You can spend a few more days in the city. If you've never experienced Indianapolis, it's a beautiful place to visit, especially at the end of summer, August kind of time. It's just absolutely gorgeous. So make sure you come out. You can have, there's general admission tickets. There's VIP tickets. General admission gets everything from that 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock time frame where we have creative storytelling, live worship. We're going to be doing some documentary stuff. There's an exclusive conversation that I have with Levi Lesko, who wrote the foreword of the book. You're not going to want to miss that. There is a live podcast recording with Daniel and Brittany Brooker right there in person. You get to be a part of the very first live podcast recording of Nothing is Wasted podcast, Nothing is Wasted Ministries. And then VIPs get in an hour early where they're going, I can't describe this immersive book experience that you're going to have, but you do not want to miss it. VIPs get that. You get some vouchers for the food trucks. You get so many. There's just so many great perks. You can go to nothingiswastedbook.com to see all the details about this launch event. Just follow that link that says launch event, and you'll be able to see the landing page for all the details about the launch event. August 1st in Indianapolis. Make sure you get your tickets as soon as possible because it is filling up fast, and we want you to be a part of this special sacred night as we celebrate releasing the message of Nothing is Wasted into the world. Would love to meet you there. Would love to shake your hand. Would love to give you a big old hug and just tell you personally, thank you for being a part of our Nothing is Wasted family. August 1st, make sure you're there. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. My name is Davey. I'm one of your hosts. And joining me, Aubrey, our other host. Aubrey, it's so good to be with you again this week.
So glad to be here. Love being here with you every single week. Love our Nothing is Wasted community and love this conversation we're going to share today with the fabulous Sara Hagerty.
That's right. This is a great conversation. I love this because I feel like there is a motif that continues to follow us around, reminding us of our frailty as human beings.
Our limitedness.
That's right. Not too long ago, our good friend Eric Shoemaker, he released a book about weakness.
Yeah,
and
the gift
here
of
we
weakness.
That's right. Here we are now talking about the gift of limitations. And so while they may sound like the same thing, they're not, but they are very akin to each other. And so I think it's just something that God is trying to remind all of us in this culture where we are trying to level up and white knuckle and push
hustle.
Yeah. That, man, there's so much that God, so much more God's inviting us into if we can align ourselves with the reality that in our weakness, his strength is made perfect.
Yeah. I heard our friend, John Mark Comer, who we've had on the show before, say something about limitations recently, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was essentially like your limitations are both gifts and where ministry is for you. So to pay attention to what they are, like God has put those limits and those boundaries in your life on purpose. Wow. For a purpose. And so that's kind of a new way I've been thinking about the limitations in my life. And sometimes your family or things that are good things can feel like limitations, but like, okay, Lord, what are you doing in that? You did that on purpose. Yeah. So very interesting. I'm excited for our listeners to hear this conversation you had with Sara.
That's right. That's right. Right now, just before we get into this conversation, I want to remind you that we are coming up on book launch season with Nothing is Wasted, the book. You can go pre-order the book at nothingiswastedbook.com. And there may still be spots available. I don't know. By the time this is released, I'm not sure. It may still be spots available for the book launch event. Come and join us in Indianapolis August 1st as we celebrate the life and legacy of Amanda and the impact that her life has had in all of our lives. It's going to be such a sacred night, such a sweet night. And Aubrey's going to be hosting the entire event for us. We're really excited about that.
I cannot wait. It's going to be, like you said, it's going to be sacred. It's going to be special. It's going to be holy. It's going to be honoring. I do feel like the Spirit of God's going to be there. And I can't wait. So yes, I don't know if there are tickets left at this point, but be sure to check out the website. Davey, what's the website again?
Yeah, it's nothingiswastedbook.com, and you'll be able to see all things launch event and pre-ordering the book related. Now, you may be able to, in the background right now, hear my 4-year-old pitching a fit.
I was wondering if we were going to go there or not. Speaking of limits.
This is the reality of podcasting, friends.
That we are keeping this real.
We're going to keep this right in here.
Listeners.
We're genuine transparency right here. We're not going to be, but this is the reality of limitations that you experience when you're podcasting out of your house. This is amazing.
Just keeping it real.
If anybody wants to, hey, listen, if we have anybody who would like to invest in or donate to a Nothing is Wasted studio, so we no longer have the limitations of crying 4-year-olds, I would be happy to have a conversation with you.
We will take those phone calls or those DMs for sure. Hey, I think that's our cue though, Davey.
It is.
Let's go ahead and take a listen to Davey's conversation with Sara Hagerty.
Sara, it is so good to have you on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for joining me.
It's great to be on. Thank you.
Well, I know that we've had a little bit of some issues already. We've had quite a morning. We got sickness going on in the family.
That's
and man,
right.
I'm so sorry about that, but I appreciate you spending time with us.
Oh yeah, I'm grateful to be holed up in the corner off my bedroom and have my husband handling it all outside the bedroom door.
There is some benefits to working from home, and there's some major limitations to it as well.
That's right.
Speaking of limitations, I think it's really interesting. This feels like a big thread and a theme in my own life, so that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, because you've just released this book. I mean, literally just released this book called The Gift of Limitations. Finding beauty in your boundaries. And I'm so excited about having this conversation with you, because this is such a needed thing for all of us to be able to lean into. Before we talk about it, though, because I'm sure there's a lot of inspiration behind why you wrote this book, I'd love for you just to share a little bit about yourself, your family, who you are, what you do, just give us a little context for your life.
Well, I have 7 kids. My oldest is 20 and my youngest is 4.
Sorry, I just had shock right there. 7 kids. Oh,
I know.
Goodness.
You got to give like a moment of silence after that. Like,
yeah,
how
you
does she do that?
You can't just gloss right over that.
She must be nuts. So we have a big family. It's a large spread. My husband and I experienced many years of infertility and kind of thought we'd always adopt, and just thought we'd have biological children first, but actually the Lord had a different plan. So we adopted 2 from Ethiopia, 2 children from Ethiopia, 2 from Uganda. And then many years later had a bunch of miracle pregnancies. And so we have a very big family, and I'm old and I have a 4-year-old. Wow. And then I love to write. As a kid, I grew up as a reader, and oftentimes people who are readers become writers. And so I will say I moonlight as a writer. I find little margins of my day and life to write. And this book, The Gift of Limitations, is my 4th book. And it's really, it's a lot of storytelling inside the book, because I love story. And I've learned through story, and I am learning him through story.
That's amazing. Well, that is one of the best ways, I've found for all of us to learn. I think about that when it comes to our kids, and we've talked about it. They just... seems like they really grasp hold of really difficult concepts, very abstract concepts through story. But that's the way God teaches us too, it seems like.
That's right. It's all
not
over
just
his
through
word.
Not just through like stories that we hear, but it's like the story of our life. Like he leads us and guides us in our own stories and gives us these revelations of who he is. And I'm sure that this book has been that way for you, or at least the inspiration behind it. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Like what led you to go, man, I want to write a book on limitations? Because that's completely contrary to our culture that often says, let's write a book on limitless potential.
Right. That's absolutely right. Well, I think the older I get, the more that I see when I see trends in my life over different seasons, like the landscape has changed, but some of the narrative and the story stays the same, then that's when I start to pay attention. There might be something that God's doing here. Now, you might say now there might be something that God's doing here, but maybe in the moment I'm a little more grumpy, like, what in the world? Why do I keep living this same thing over and over again? Like, for the love. And so I think I started to see a trend. In my 20s, I was watching all my friends have their babies and grow their families. And my husband and I were experiencing pretty profound loss in infertility. And my dad also died young. And I just had loss in my 20s. And I thought your 20s were you conquer the world and you change the world, you live out your dreams. And I was in a waiting room. And so I just thought, gosh, my body isn't doing what it's supposed to do. I am limited from my dreams. And then I thought, well, that's just the one season. You live your limited season and then you climb up and out of it. And as my family grew and I started to have some of the dreams of my heart fulfilled in terms of having a family, and I realized I am just as limited, but in a different way. And I'm just as frustrated as I am with these limitations as I was when I had different limitations. Then I out of my grumpiness, began asking the question, like, God, what are you doing?
It's interesting that you say, it's not until you look back in retrospect that you start to actually see some of those thumbprints, but in the middle of it, it's hard. You're really grumpy, but then you can kind of emerge from it's like, it feels like a lot of our responses at first were just like, why? Frustrated by the whole process, right? And then it's God and his loving kindness brings us to this place where we're going, okay, Lord, what are you doing in this?
Right.
And I'm curious, as you got to that place, Lord, what are you doing in this? What are some of the things you felt like he showed you? What were some of the things he said, hey, this is maybe not this is explanation as to why you're going through this, because I'm not sure if we ever know that fully on the side of eternity, but here's some things I'm doing in the midst of all of this in you and in your family.
I think I am naturally a person who's oriented towards big mission and big vision. I am an idealist and I dream big, and I have associated that with the heart of God, because surely he has big dreams for us. And in some ways, I think I've kind of cherry-picked through God's word and missed that there is a lot of beauty in the small and in the quiet and in the slow movement and the slow growth. And so as I look back, I think God in many ways was limiting me to find the Jesus who, walked 3 miles an hour, the Jesus who wept and he slept and he ached. And he probably, as a teenager, had acne, and he got sick. I don't know about him getting sick. That might be too much of a stretch. But just the reality that Jesus put himself into flesh. And I want to be the overcomer. And it wasn't until I really hit limitations kind of over and over again in different seasons that I started to think there might be something to be found in the small and in what's right in front of me, and isn't actually really glorious, but is very normal.
I love that you said that you're an idealist. I relate with that a whole lot. I'm definitely a big dreamer, big idealist. And I think God uses those things, right? He wires us in certain ways. And like you said,
he put eternity in our hearts.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would seem to me, you said that you kind of transferred those same characteristics onto God. I'm going to see God as an idealist kind of God. Like he wants, he created an idyllic world in Eden. And yet at the same time, that can interfere with, our recognition of our limitations or our contentment. Unpack that a little bit more as you wrestled and as you continue to wrestle through that. How do you recognize the God-given, what he's instilled in you, the unique makeup of who you are, and at the same time recognize the other aspects of what he's trying to teach you?
I think idealism can actually, for many of us, be a coping mechanism. I write about this in the book, just what happens, how did we get to be idealists? Some of us came out of great pain, and out of our pain, we create an idealistic world that if I can just have that beautiful thing, then I will find contentment. For me, I think of in my 20s with infertility, it was dreaming about my family and thinking like I just didn't even realize all untold amounts of energy throughout my day dreaming about what I didn't have. And in some ways that was a way to cope and not grieve what I didn't have. Because if I could keep dreaming about it, keep reaching for it, keep pushing for it, I could avoid the pain of grief. And then I started to see, then I have this large family and I have 7 kids, and there's a lot more pain because I am also an introvert who loves time alone, which is nearly impossible with this many children. And so I find myself, on a normal day when it's 9:30 in the morning and I'm taking a walk with my little kids and I'm stumbling over their boots in the mudroom and the house is messy and I feel like I'm too old for this. This is like, I need much more order, much less chaos. I can dream about the day when they're older and I don't have that in the same way and avoid the very pain that I think God uses to reach us. So there is a pain in the little paper cuts, right? Not just the big griefs. There's a pain in me being an introvert who loves time alone and I love order, and I have 7 people I have 8 people actually right now in this house that are making a lot of noise and a lot of chaos, and perhaps God is inviting me to sit in even that small pain with him, because that could be the place that I encounter him. But my idealism keeps wanting to give me a way out because I keep dreaming about when I'm not going to be here.
It's so interesting that, as you think through the character and nature of God, who would use these, limitations or these impasses within our own daily life to get us to butt up against something that we're not, this is what I desire, this is what I want, but this is what I'm experiencing. And it seems that those are contrary to each other. And yet God is using those things. How do you not grow frustrated, resentful, toward God even in that? Like, I think sometimes we can recognize like, okay, I see what you're doing, God, but I'm not okay with this.
Right. Well, I think we all feel that, right? I think one of the most significant steps is naming our limitations, because I wouldn't necessarily call myself like a cynical, grumpy person, but like if I start to see a lot of sarcasm or a lot of bitterness or a lot of like muttering under my breath, and there's usually a sign that there's something going on inside that I have not named and brought to God. So I think there's something significant about actually naming our limitations. We react to them. We spend a lot of time reacting to them. Like, I think if all of us would take a minute and look at our day and think about the amount of time we spend either thinking or responding to thinking about how we're going to overcome something, dreaming about when we don't have this limitation in our life, responding with, reaching into the fridge or scrolling our phone because it feels so overwhelming to actually be limited.
Yeah.
There would be a ability to release that if we could first name it. If we can actually name our limitations and not call ourselves having a tantrum just because we name them. It's really hard that I dreamed about having all these kids and now I have all these kids and I'm tired. The second thing is then I think actually grieving them, giving ourselves permission. It's okay to grieve that you want a different job for your husband that provides more financially for your family. It's okay to grieve that the back pain isn't going away. It's okay to grieve that you wanted your parent to be present in this season, but they're sick and you're taking care of them. In some ways, as Christians, we're always giving ourselves the end of the story, and we don't give ourselves permission to grieve the middle of it. And so then we actually get really stuck.
That's right.
Because we're constantly coaching ourselves towards thinking better about things rather than going, this is really hard. This makes me think of a story. I broke my ankle, and it was right around the time of my mom's 70th birthday. And she lived in a different part of the country. And my mom is wonderful and very invested in our family. And what I didn't realize, what I thought was just this family barbecue, and I didn't realize until days before, was my aunts were planning this large 70th birthday party for her. People were flying in for it, slideshow, tribute to my mom. And my ankle was broken and I couldn't travel by myself. And when I realized this was actually a big event, not just a barbecue, it just hadn't connected with me. I was foggy, and I realized I couldn't actually make it. I, in my soul, was like so sad that I couldn't celebrate my mom. And so I could easily go to grumpy, like, I got all these kids and all this responsibility, and here I am pregnant and I can't make it, and here it's the same old story again. But it was like the Lord gave me in that moment the invitation to go, this is hard and this is sad. And no, it's not major. Your mom hasn't died. You're just missing her birthday party, but it's worth grieving. It's worth sitting with me and going, this hurts. And I'm on the outside and asking the Lord, what's underneath this, and giving it a minute to grieve it. Because I think as we grieve our limitations, then we actually have the opportunity to see that there might be something on the other side of them.
So good. That's so good. And we often talk about that in terms of the portal or the invitation that God has for us in our pain is to actually go through it, directly through it, not trying to get around it, escape it. You can't go over it.
It's like that children's book, right? Exactly, I mean, I even write about that children's book in my book. This notion of like, I'm going to try every which way to not have to go through this. I mean, we as humans, we do that without thinking.
Yeah. It's amazing to me. And yet at the same, and it's ironic that when you try to go around it, that's when you get stuck in it. And
you get stuck in a worse way. I mean, you get stuck because the stuck is actually the grumpiness, the bitterness, the short temper that we all kind of just accept as a part of as we get older. These are the things that are just going to be a part of me because I look at my cantankerous great uncle and he does the same thing. Right? But the reality is that there's a story behind that. That grumpiness isn't just age and aching bones and joints. That grumpiness is I'm fostering a lot of grief that I've never given name to. And I'm letting it just sit in there instead of sitting in it with God.
Wow. That's so insightful. I think you're right. I think we just chalk it up sometimes. It's like, oh, that's when we're just crotchety and old. That's what we are, right? And that's what it's going to be. And the reality is Jesus' promise for peace it's not limited by age. It's not like all of a sudden, no, once you get a certain age, you're not going to experience, or you don't have the opportunity to experience peace in the midst of, hardship that we're going to have in this life. You bring up this idea of grief in the book. I know you have a chapter called Good Grief, the power of grief to grow our surrender. And this is really, I love that we're having this conversation because I feel like that part of the wrestling, trying to reconcile being an idealist and surrendering, or hoping for, praying for, reaching for, striving for, all the things that someone, who may be a high achiever in life, or maybe even like high levels of faith can foster this, like, no, God's going to come through, or this is going to change. My circumstances are going to be different. And yet there's so much of our journey with the Lord that requires a surrender to just go, yeah, you know what? Maybe it's not going to be like what I thought it was going to be. Can you talk about that a little bit, this idea of grief and surrender? Because that was such a huge part of my own grief journey in losing my wife, was just coming to a place of surrender. But what was that? What's that like for you? And hi, friend. I know these stories on the podcast are so encouraging to hear as you listen to others who have walked through unimaginable pain and found hope in it, and they've walked through it. But I also know that how to move forward can be the question that so many of you guys who are listening to this or watching this on YouTube, you're asking that question currently as you're walking through the valley. I know when I think about my own journey after losing my wife, Amanda, I wish that I had something practical, a guide to walk me through the pain and the process of healing, which is why we created the Pain to Purpose course. The Pain to Purpose course is truly a guide to help you remove the debris of crisis in your life and move forward with a renewed sense of victory and purpose. Hundreds have taken the course and found so much hope and healing in their own story. But I want you to listen to what Jera had to say about how the course helped her find her way out of anxiety and depression.
I came in a very low spot in my life. I was walking through depression. I was walking through a lot of anxiety. That led me to some really poor decisions in my life that got me to the place where I thought I was no longer worthy to be used by God. In the course, I learned a lot of practical tips when I'm feeling unworthy or when I'm really low. First, I learned how to label all those feelings, and then I learned to say, no, This biblical truth is that God loves me, that I am purposeful, that he put me here for a reason, and I had to put that before my unworthiness that I was feeling.
So if you're ready to take the next step in healing from whatever hurt you've walked through and want help in how to identify your pain and how to move forward, sign up now for the Pain to Purpose course by going to course.nothingiswasted.com. Again, that's course.nothingiswasted.com. You'll have access to all the course videos and everything you need to start moving from pain into purpose. So often we continue to walk around with unprocessed pain and trauma without the guidance that we actually need in order to navigate our inner world. Let Nothing Is Wasted Ministries help you on the path towards healing.
Well, I think that we have stories like yours with your wife, which is absolutely tragic. Or mine, having lost my dad at a younger age. There are those things that I think our culture gives some level of permission for grief. And so we naturally can maybe grieve those a little easier. Mm-hmm. But I think our culture our Christian culture has a very low tolerance for grieving the smaller things. Mm-hmm. Like we have very much, and the bigger things too. I don't know if you felt this with your wife, but I felt this with my dad, that I was tired of myself grieving at a certain point. Like I felt like surely this can't still be coming up in my heart and my life. I think in the smaller ways, I don't have a whole lot of tolerance for myself. When something is hard, I'm kind of like, stop throwing a tantrum. Like I see myself like an obstinate child instead of a person who was made and created by a God who wept himself. I think of the story of Joseph in the Bible. I can't remember exactly how many times it says he wept. We quote that verse of like what he says to his brothers, what you intended for evil, God meant for good. If you look at like the history of Joseph, it was a lot of weeping.
That's right.
I mean, I think maybe more than any other person noted in the Bible, he wept.
Wow.
And yet we go, well, my kid, for example, I have a child who has Lyme disease and he is sick often. And I could coach myself into going, you know what? He's got his whole life ahead of him. Girl, tomorrow's a new day. Pray and believe God's going to heal him. Or I can say, but right now it's really hard and we don't have answers. And I'm going to just sit with this with God. And I'm going to let God hold me today because it's another day that he's missing basketball practice. And he's 10. And we have this war within us. Many of us don't even give permission to the war because we just coach ourselves out of the pain that I think we actually need to become the person that says what God intended for evil, or what you intended for evil, God used for good.
Wow. That's so good. This, again, here it is. Joseph's life is lining up with the same thing, having to work through the grief and the weeping before he's able to come to this place of actually owning the idea, like in his soul, owning the idea. Oh, I truly believe that God is working this for good. We can say
not
it
just
like
saying right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
is interesting. I mean, I haven't thought about that, but like that's a moment word phrase. Like when we're pressed, there's a lot of other things that come out of our mouths than things like what came out of Joseph's, but it actually probably reveals in that moment his spur of the moment words were what was deep within him.
That's right.
I know that God uses for good. And I would say, I think it requires a grief to get there. Yeah. And so I think some people listening may even just need permission that like your neighbor may be going through something absolutely tragic. And you're going, I'm just not sure if I can pay the bills this month. Your paper cut is not too small to grieve with God. Your child who's having a hard time in class over and over again, though you haven't lost your child to death, that still is something that God cares about and wants you to bring to him in grief so that you can actually work it through with God.
Right. Wow. Yeah, we were just having a conversation last night about, some things that our kids are trying to navigate at school, and we're trying to figure out, where do we limit ourselves from stepping in and letting them have to deal with this themselves so that we're not short-circuiting the process that God has for them and having to go through their own grief and sorting through that with God. And, and so it's like layer upon layer upon layer as we're trying to figure this out as adults. They're figuring this out as kids, and we're trying to help foster that. And that can be so tricky. You've already mentioned, Sara, several different things that just kind of, if I'm to peer into your family a little bit, a season of infertility, adoption, those are murky waters to navigate in and of themselves. Your child that has Lyme disease, there's a lot of stuff that your family's going through, and there's a lot of little and big things you guys are having to grieve. You and your husband together, I'm sure you guys have found that you're grieving differently. You have to find how to do that together and yet
absolutely.
do it separately. Talk about that a little bit, especially maybe that season of infertility as you guys were sorting and are sorting through that and navigating it together. How have you learned, maybe from gender perspectives or from, husband and wife partnership, how do you hold space for each other in that?
I think grief really looks different in every person. And I've seen it obviously the most up close in my husband. And one of the things that we've noticed is when I'm grieving, I'm pretty verbal about it. I can feel it and I'm giving myself space to sit in it. I just have seen the fruit of not trying to rush past the hard, but sitting in the hard long enough to have God do a work. I think some of us are really afraid to sit in the hard because we're afraid if we sit in it, it's going to consume us and we're going to be Eeyore and never happy again. But I think we need to have a little bit of testimony and experience inside of us with some of the paper cut type griefs where we're aching and we watch God work it through as we grieve with him. And I tend to be verbal about that. My husband, it's just different. We've grown to understand that when he's gruff and when he's maybe a little rough around the edges, that is actually the external version of his grief, that there's a grief underneath that. And for me as a wife, just giving him space that if he comes home and he's gruff, it's actually not because I'm married to an angry man, but because underneath that he's feeling a lot of pain and just needs a little bit of time to be able to feel it and talk to the Lord about it and talk to me about it. If I'm right on him as to come on, can't you come home a little happier? Then I actually shortcut his process instead of declaring. I could ask questions and go, it was a rough day, wasn't it? There's a lot going on in there, which oftentimes then sets him in a different modality where he's, hearing someone mirror what he's feeling and he's going, yeah, this is hard and I need to sit in this. It just looks really different for us. And I think it's hard for me at times because he is like a protector to the nth degree. He is our Papa Bear. Yeah. And so when he's weak, I can get scared at times. When he's really grieving, it can feel scary for me because I'm oh, but we all need to lean into your chest, but also recognizing that the more that he grieves, the greater man he becomes. I just love who my husband is becoming. And he's been much more in touch with his emotions in the last 10 years than the 10 years before that. And that, as women, we maybe need to know that we can create a safe space for our husbands to grieve and in that, or to feel pain and express it. Yeah. It might be messy at first, but in that we actually might get more of the man that we really want because he's in touch with his heart more. It just may be messy in the getting there.
That's so good. How, you bring up a good point in this idea of like almost trying to hide our limitations, like this, for men, I can relate to what you're saying about your husband. I don't know if I want to expose my limitations or my frustrations or the things that I'm feeling like I'm butting up against right now, because I'm supposed to be the protector. I'm supposed to be I've got to really take care of my family. And I'm sure there's also, for women as well, you can give some insight into this, reasons to hide or veil your limitations, whereas it might actually be undoing or unraveling the work that God is doing in your life. What would you say most women struggle with when it comes to, and why is this like being real about our grief, our limitation, why is that so difficult for us?
Hey, Nothing is Wasted community, it's Davey Blackburn, and I wanted to be the first to let you know about how you can be the first to pre-order my book, Nothing is Wasted, a true story of hope, forgiveness, and finding purpose in pain. Simply go to nothingiswastedbook.com, and there you will find links to pre-order the book, as well as instructions on how you can receive over $300 worth of pre-order bonuses that we're offering, including getting a sneak peek at the first 2 chapters of the book. Many of you have been a part of this story from the beginning, and many of you are new to the Nothing is Wasted community and to the podcast. Either way, I know that this story will give you incredible hope in the midst of whatever you're navigating, and it will serve as a reminder that in all of our pain, all of our suffering, our losses, that nothing, absolutely nothing is wasted. I can't wait for you to read this and to see how God showed up in the middle of my greatest pain and how He can and will do the same for you. Thanks for being here, for being a part of this community, and for sharing this message of hope and redemption with those who need it most. Go to nothingiswastedbook.com to pre-order your copy today.
I think culturally the world is against us. I think it's a moment that's really difficult for women. In a given day, versus say 20 years ago, I can leave this podcast interview and then I can see what my childhood best friend is doing in Europe. I can see what my neighbor is planting in her garden. I can see what my friend down the street is cooking for dinner. I can see another friend's child's 16th birthday party. And those are all things that as a woman, I might naturally look and go, how can I integrate those things into my life? I need more travel. I need to cook a better dinner. My flower beds are desperate for attention. So I think we just do that kind of unthinking. And so in many ways, we are subtly working against a limited life. In some ways, my heart behind this book is to increase the conversation on our limitations, because we can look around and go, my girlfriend, she might not have 7 kids and feeling extremely limited because of the challenges of so many kids and kids who've been through trauma. She might only have 3, but she's got limitations too that she's wrestling with. And I think as Christians, we have sort of inflated the narrative of the victorious God such that we haven't realized there's a lot that God says in this world you will have troubles. And we focus on the take heart, I have overcome the world, when really, in order for me to become the kind of woman that I want to be, I'm going to have to live through limitations and not just grit my teeth and hate them, but maybe come to the understanding that weak is the new strong.
Yeah.
That the parts of me that are weak and can't do it all might actually be the parts that will grow and flourish the most under God's care.
Man, that's like one of my favorite and one of my least favorite verses in Scripture, that His power is made perfect in our weakness, because I'm just not a fan of the fact that there is weakness inside,
Right.
Again, like you said, our culture has really propped up this idea of, trying to mitigate your weaknesses, really working on those things so that you can highlight and feature your strengths.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we naturally optimize. I mean, I think we as humans would optimize otherwise, but we're in a culture of optimization. And so we don't necessarily even evaluate this thing that I'm working so hard to overcome. Perhaps, as you said earlier, perhaps I'm made to accept it. I think about, so we had a surprise pregnancy. Well, all my pregnancies were surprise, but I was 42 and we were done having kids.
Wow.
And I found out I was pregnant. And it's ironic. This is part of maybe even what catalyzed me writing the book is I'm feeling limited by the gift that God has given me in a child in the same way that I felt limited when I couldn't have those gifts. So there's a thread here in me. But for months through my pregnancy, I just felt like, how are we going to do this? I mean, I had told my husband right before we found out that we were pregnant, I said, there are so many needs in this home and there's not enough of me and I feel like I'm drowning. And it was the next day I found out I was pregnant. And for months, I thought, how am I going to do? I'm not going to survive this. I physically was very tired just because I was older and pregnant. Right. And how am I going to survive this many kids and this many needs? I already felt like I was drowning. And now many years later, I look back and I'm like, oh, God gave us the greatest gift in that child because she kept me home more. She kept me more centered and present in the life right in front of me. And she is a total delight. I mean, she is the favorite in our house. I don't mean my favorite kid, but every person in this house's favorite is this little 4-year-old. And I look back and I go, I saw all the ways that she would limit me. And I didn't realize that maybe God actually wants to limit me. Psalm 16:6 says, the boundary lines for me have fallen in pleasant places. We don't wake up thinking that. Many of us, God is using our current circumstances to lead us there and to show us that's actually the best way is when we are boundaried and we find God inside the fence line instead of always looking over the fence line to the next thing.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I think one of the most insightful things, and it correlates with this. I'd never heard this about God, but at one point I heard someone talk about how God is a God who knows when to say that's enough. And that flies in the face. Our humanity
We
is
never
all
want to
about
say
appetites, feeding our appetites, feeding our appetites. We don't know when to say that's enough. And in God's kindness, he often has to say that to us. Say, okay, that's enough. We're going to pull back. We're going to like put a boundary here. And I love that, what you just brought forward, that verse that talks about his boundaries. His boundary lines fall in pleasant places for us. That's amazing. Sara, you brought up you have a household full of kids. So already 7 kids. I mean, that is a glaring reminder that you're limited. There's only so much of you and only so much of your husband that can go around. But you also have a household full of kids who have grown up with trauma, and you alluded to that earlier. That's something that a lot of us are experiencing as we navigate different painful parts of our stories, is, trying to create space where not only are we grieving, not only are we trying to find God in our own grief, but we're also helping these kids as they're trying to navigate some really tricky transitions in their own stories. What are some things I'm just curious, what are some things you guys have found that have been really helpful in that for you?
I think as parents of kids who've been through trauma, one of the most significant things for us has been looking at our own stories and our own lives. And we don't have nearly the degree of pain that our kids have. But I think there is something about the responsibility we have as parents to looking at our own hearts, looking at our own triggers, the things that make me crazy, the things that make me especially anxious, the things that keep me up at night. I write about in the book this notion of self-awareness, which I think is underappreciated, but it's a pretty key skill in life, is being able to look at ourselves and to notice, like, what is causing me anxiety in this moment? Why is my heart racing? Why do I keep having headaches? Or why is my body so tired? Like, could there be more to the story than just, I need to push through, I need to try harder? With my I also have Lyme disease. I don't know if I mentioned that.
Oh, wow. No, you didn't. No.
But what's interesting is I was sick for a period of time, like a year and a half probably, before I actually was diagnosed with Lyme disease. And as I look back at that period of time where I was sick, there was a lot going on in my life. And I kept having expectations of myself that I would continue to perform at the pace that I always had. I'm going to bring another meal to the sick friend. I'm going to show up to another Bible study. I'm going to be able to respond as quickly to text messages. I'm going to be just as engaged with my friends or just as engaged with my kids. I was keeping a pace in my life that my body actually couldn't keep up. And so I think one of the things that we've learned, not just through our kids having walked through trauma, but our own understanding of our own stories, is there's a story happening around us and in each one of us. And sometimes God gives us limitations so that we have a minute to just look at what's happening here, to look at me, not just look at when is this circumstance going to change, or when is this kid going to change, or when is this boulder, this mountain going to finally move. But could it be that the mountain isn't moving because the Lord wants to give me a minute to look at what's happening inside of me that I just naturally want to ignore? It's much easier for me to get on my knees and intercede for a mountain to move than it is for me to get quiet and go, what is going on in here that's making me feel like I'm going to die if this mountain doesn't move?
Wow, that's so good. That's so good. I feel like that bleeds into the next thing I wanted to ask you is, if someone's starting to recognize that right now and they're going, okay, I love the way you put it, by the way, maybe there's more to this story. Maybe there's more to this story that's going, right? But if someone's starting to see that in their own life, okay, maybe there's more to this story than what I'm just experiencing on the external right now. And they're getting curious, what are some practical steps that they can begin to take to join God in that invitation that he's clearly putting in front of them?
I think in a small way that actually could be really big is giving it yourself a few minutes a day. Like, I'm talking 2 to 3 minutes to pay attention to, when am I biting my fingernails? When am I snapping at my kids? When am I reaching at in the fridge? When am I scrolling when I didn't plan to scroll and I'm just caught up on Instagram for long stretches? And tracing that back to, so when did that start in my day? Well, it was that text from a friend that made me actually feel really anxious. And then asking questions of yourself, and really of God, of yourself. Where's that anxiety coming from? I mean, I think we are underdeveloped in asking questions of what's happening inside of us. And so a lot of times we don't even know what to bring to God. We feel stuck. I mean, how many times do you hear, like, I feel stuck, I just feel numb? I think it's because we oftentimes approach God as we do our neighbor, like we just the face that we put forward to other people, instead of our, bedhead 6:30 in the morning grumpy self. Like, that's the self that God actually wants. And I think in some ways we need to be asking ourselves the questions of that time, not when we're all done up and ready to go out into the world, but more so the more private moments, like, what's happening in my heart, and where is this anxiety coming from, and what do you want to say to me about this? And maybe, God, this limitation that's not moving, could there be a reason why you're not moving it? Is there something you want to reach in my heart when this isn't moving? Wow. I think about going through a hard stretch in our lives, and we took a family trip to Maui. It was like really extravagant. This is not how we normally roll. This was kind of a once in a lifetime. And some of the hard that was happening in our life actually came with us to Maui. Like, the hard wasn't lifting. And we're in this beautiful place and realizing that, like, you can't run away from the hard things. Right. And I had an afternoon to just be alone at the edge of the cliffs in Maui. It was gorgeous, water below, whales breaching in the distance. And I'm saying to God in my journal and out loud, like, we have this, you brought me all the way to Maui and we have this hard thing. You brought me all the way to Maui and we have this hard thing. And as I'm saying it, in praying it, the emphasis shifted. And it was like the Lord saying to me, you have this hard thing and I brought you all the way to Maui. You have this hard thing and look, you're in Maui.
Wow.
And it was like this framing for me that there is beauty to be had when the mountain doesn't move. There is beauty to be had when the fence line isn't moving. It might just not be that God's saying, try harder, pray harder, build your team of intercessors to get that fence line to move. It could actually be that God is saying, there is grass underneath your feet and a magnolia tree in your yard. Yeah. And do you hear that bluebird over there right in front of you? This heart isn't moving, and I brought you to Maui.
Wow. I know this has been so encouraging to me personally. I feel like one of the things, Sarah, you don't know this, but I feel like one of the things the Lord is really pressing into my life is that there's a whole lot of stuff in my life that I can't solve. And I don't know why it's taken me almost 40 years to really come to grips with that. But it's like on every front, you can't solve this, you can't solve this, you can't solve this, you can't fix this, you can't fix this. And that God is a God of help. He is our ever-present help in time of trouble. And that is only really going to be realized when we accept our limitations. And so I'm so grateful that this is the message that you're carrying right now, and grateful that you've released this book. Where can we follow along? Where can we get, obviously we'll put a link here where people can pick up the book really easily, conveniently, right? If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be right below. If you're listening on a podcast platform, we'll put it in the show notes. But where can people follow along with what you're doing, Sarah?
I am on Instagram at Sara Hagerty Writes. My website is sarahagerty.net. And then I also have a Substack. So I write pretty regularly on Substack / Sara Hagerty. I write a lot more candidly, a lot more frequently. That's kind of my happy place, if not in a book.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. This has just been incredibly
this was a great
insightful.
Conversation.
Oh, my goodness. Davey. And really convicting too, just to recognize that we are finite human beings, and God wants to step into those places where we're finding out that we are limited. And so I'm grateful for you, Sarah. Thanks so much. I hope all of those babies get to feeling better in your household. But thanks for spending time with us.
Thank you.
Okay, Davey, that was another fantastic conversation. Appreciate Sarah so much. And your son Cohen stopped crying.
Yes.
So, hey, lots of miracles happening.
Yeah, we were able to remind him of his limitations and the boundaries of our home. So
yeah, well done. Good job. Good
next
job.
up after the book
parenting.
Nothing is Wasted will be a parenting book by people who are not experts.
Everyone's gonna buy that.
We're just like you guys. We're all trying to figure this whole parenting thing out, aren't we?
Seriously. Podcasters, pastors, just like you.
Oh my goodness.
We can move on from this, but I don't envy the little kid stage because I love it. There's such fun things about it, but they do.
Oh, it's so fun.
They just make some decisions about things and it is what it is. So
I'm telling you.
Good times. Yep. Good times.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
so limits.
Yes, part of this conversation for me, just that really stuck out to me, which we had time to dive into it. Speaking of limitations, we're limited by time. But was the idea of how idealism and contentment, how they get rolled up together, because there's a tension between the two of those things. I am an idealistic person. I am a achiever, a hard driver, and it's very difficult for me to truthfully just to figure out, okay, when is it okay for me to have a holy discontent, to not be contented?
Yeah.
And when do I need to just step back and go, you know what, I'm content with where things are at, with what, I mean, I always have a growth mentality. So I'm thinking growth for myself, for our family, for our organization.
Yep.
But on some level that can also be, that could slip into, what we know as a classic blunder could be, hubris or like, oh, this idea of we're just going to keep overextending or keep and not recognize the limitations that we have. So I struggle with that tension. I know you're a pretty idyllic kind of person as well.
Totally.
And you're a visionary. And so I'm curious what your thoughts were as you were listening to that.
Yeah. And I think I struggle with it too personally, Davey, not even just like, certainly like career and church leadership and things like that. But even in my personal life, like I'm thinking about that sort of the ideal version of myself or the ideal version of my marriage or the ideal version of, we're joking about parenting, but parenting, right?
Right.
And when I fall short of that, I can fill in that gap with some discontentment, because what I can do is go, oh, that means something is wrong with my marriage. Oh, that means something's wrong with me. Oh, that means. And so I have to be really careful. I think we all do, to go, okay, God has made some of us idealists, and that's good, because that means God is calling us to like partner with him to, to reform things that are wrong and to bring justice to injustice and to have, standards of godliness and goodness and things that are meaningful. Like that matters. But then also, if it leads you to a place of discouragement, discontentment, dissatisfaction that isn't holy, that's actually kind of turning you into a bitter cynic, obviously you've gone the wrong way there, right? So it kind of, it ends up, I think, being a little bit of this heart posture, and like most things, this tension where you're like, okay, Lord, you've called me to the next thing. You've called me to grow. And also you've called me to just be and be with you and be satisfied and be thankful. And so that the discipline, I guess, of both, right? Later this year, we're going to have a conversation with Rich Veloda here at Nothing is Wasted. I got to talk with him just a few weeks ago, and he talks a little bit about this, like how in this culture we can, running, rushing, and not just the busyness piece of it, but what you're talking about, this kind of like pushing forward.
Right.
We can end up choosing like a violent rhythm.
Yeah.
Rather than one that's Jesus's, rather than like a Psalm 23, God lead me beside still pasture. So it is that tension of like, go for it and be grateful.
Right.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder too, if like each person, this is one of those like person specific kind of things where we each have our own proclivities toward, some of us are going to have a proclivity toward passivity or toward not making the move or not taking the risk. Or so like one of the things that I think God is going to work on you consistently with is take bold, brave steps, like act in faith, move, push yourself a little bit more. Like there is more in you by the Holy Spirit of God than what you're giving yourself credit for.
That's right.
You know,
Yes.
recognize the resurrection power of his spirit
Let's
that's inside
go.
of you.
Yes.
So I think that is like, there's some people, maybe that's what God's working on them with and constantly calling them these things. And there are others of us who we kind of just like throw caution to the wind and certain, you know, and limitations to the wind. We're like, I can do this. And we have a proclivity to becoming more independent of God and jumping out ahead of him in his timing, or trying to, you know, force something to happen, or all of those things. And so I found
That's
that
so
like
true.
maybe that's what the thing that God keeps circling with people like me, where it's like, hey, recognize you have a limitation. Like you need to be still. You need to, I mean, Christy and I were just looking at I'm reading a really fascinating book right now. I can't endorse it yet because I don't know the end of it, but I'm reading it right now and it's really fascinating. It's called A Time to Advance. And it's about the rhythms of the Hebrew calendar.
Oh, wow.
And
That's cool.
what that means for us in terms of just our humanity and how God kind of set up the Hebrew calendar to align like with how he created us, that when we operate in that there is some kind of a beautiful rhythm that happens. Right. And we've thrown out the Hebrew calendar, and there's a whole lot that we could go into it in that sense. I mean, the new covenant, and there's a lot of different things, but it's kind of a call back to, in a lot of ways, call back to Sabbath and a call back to all of these things that we're going, oh man, a lot of times Western culture is throwing this stuff out. So as I'm reading this, I'm going, this seems to be the thing that God keeps convicting me of in a hard charging season with launching the book and traveling and speaking. We've got all these things going on. God keeps bringing me back to like, recognize your limitations, recognize there are battles that only God can fight. And he wants to fight those battles for you.
That's right.
And on your behalf, but you right now are picking up your arms and you're trying to go fight that battle, and you cannot fight this battle.
Oh, it's so good.
And so I think that this has just been a good reminder to me. And I think everyone's going to have to find what that is in their own
for them, right?
Conviction, right? To go, what is God pressing in on me when it comes to this? But definitely the wrestling. That's what I think is so nice, is when we have authors like Sara Hagerty come on to say, you're going to have to wrestle with this. This is not something that I'm not going to give you a quick, easy answer to this.
Right. And you probably won't solve it, right? This is going to be kind of a lifelong journey, a lifelong tension, a lifelong work of the Holy Spirit in you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was a great conversation. I mean, incredible. Yeah. And so I would encourage you guys, as you guys are doing that, just lean in. What is the Lord trying to speak to you about? I do believe he wants to speak to you. He's got something for you out of this, out of all of our podcast episodes that we have. This is not just casual, listen to this while you get on that. These are like really things that we should wrestle with, things that we should really take to heart. And we'd love to help you in that. So if there's any way that we can, reach out to us, please feel free to. But we do have a way that you can get started if you're interested in finding out more about the resources that Nothing is Wasted provides, as we are helping you partner with God to take back your story. We do have a 5 steps, what's called the 5 steps to taking back your story Zoom call.
Love that.
And I host that right now. It's about once a month. Yeah. And down the road, we've got other folks who are going to be hosting it. Aubrey might be hosting one of those, but there's several different ways that we want to help you get started in that. So if you want to get started in your journey as you're trying to find a purpose out of your pain, or if you're trying to find what your next step is, just go to nothingiswasted.com/start here. Yeah. And we'd love for you to register for that next Zoom call. Also, we have the book that is launching very soon. July 30th is the official launch date.
I can't believe it. Woohoo!
We're starting a series about the book launch. This
is going to be fun.
It's going to be amazing. We're bringing some guests on who are really pivotal and integral parts of my healing journey. And so it's going to be an awesome, awesome series. You want to tune in for that. If you're interested in coming to the book launch event, if there's still tickets left, you can go to nothingiswastedbook.com, find out information on how you can get either VIP tickets or general admission tickets. And we would love for you to pre-order the book.
So yes, pre-order that book.
Speaking of, this is the advanced reader copy.
This is look at that. That is like a real live. That is a real live
actual book. It's an actual book. Now the real book's going to be hardcover with the dust jacket. So it's like it's going to be amazing. But this is like what we send out to, podcasters. And this is cool, Aubrey, because these are the things that we receive, at Nothing is Wasted from authors, and they're like, hey, here's an advanced reader copy. Could you
And
consider
now
having me on
you
the?
get to.
And now we are doing the same thing. It's so
Oh,
crazy.
it's so exciting,
You
Davey.
know, I know you've
I'm
done
so
this. You've been
excited.
around the blog. You've done it multiple
Yeah,
times.
I've done
but
this.
oh my
No,
God,
it's
so fun.
exciting every time. It's like you're holding your baby. It's
I know.
really, really
I know.
exciting. Well, we are so excited for that launch party. We're so excited for the continued conversations we're going to have specifically about the book and people important in your life. So we've got a couple incredible episodes coming up for you.
Yeah.
Before we take a listen to a clip of one, we want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all of the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Download and stream his music wherever it is you do that. You can also find and follow, engage with us at Nothing is Wasted Ministries, at Davey Blackburn, at ObSamp. And I think we've covered everything. So let's go ahead and take a listen to part of next week's conversation.
I'm going to turn into myself and be closed in
Yeah.
myself and go down my own hole, which I think is a
Yeah.
sign of unhealth, where we're not inviting God or others into our own stories.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. Do you have thoughts on what keeps us from going out instead? What stops us? Why do we isolate?
I give
Why do
three
we go
reasons
inward?
here. Number one, I think our pace of life is so violent that there's
Yeah,
no
totally.
time to actually take inventory of what's going on inside of me.
You just said our pace of life
Yeah.
is so violent. That is, I want to emphasize that because I don't think we say it loud enough, and to use violent is the right way to talk about our rhythms. I will sometimes look at my calendar and go, this is a violent week. This is not okay,
Indeed.
So anyway, go ahead. I just want to emphasize
Yeah.
that for people. We are
Yeah,
violent
so a
in
violent
our
pace, number one. Number two, I think our own families of origin have formed us profoundly in these areas. There are certain emotions that we were not given permission to feel or display within our families of origin. And so
Wow.
that stuff marks us very deeply.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.